Can I ask you first, what is the link between sex and death?
Probably transcendence and mystery. Like I feel I haven't died. I don't know.
Hi, Brendan.
It's funny, Hannah. I was thinking actually, I've known you for over 20 years now, but we've never actually really worked together, and I actually don't think we've really ever had like a deep conversation. I think of you as a kind of like total peer and total colleague, and I feel like our kind of journeys have sort of happened in parallel. But we've just had very few opportunities to connect. So I've actually been really looking forward to this.
Same, thank you. I had the same process when I realized, I was like, oh, for all that I admire Brendan and have come up in the same generation as him in theater, I don't think we've ever worked together or even sat down and ever talked about our aesthetics. But okay, on that note, here's something I'm super curious about for essentially selfish reasons. But I recently reread, within the last 3 months, I reread East of Berlin, one of my early plays. And I did not like it. And I didn't think it was good. And I found it unsophisticated. And I feel like I'm a stronger writer now. And then I started to think about, is it good that I don't like it? Does it mean I've developed as an artist? Or is it bad that I don't like it? Does it mean that I'm actually a bad artist? And then I wondered, since we were going to meet, if you ever experienced that, if you think back to your early work, and do you feel a good distance from it or bad embarrassment about it? Like when you think about how you were when we would have first met 20 years ago, what do you think about how you've developed as an artist since then, and what do you think about your early work?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. It's funny because I don't really have any records of my work, so I kind of can't sit in front of a play I directed 20 years ago and experience it. So it's all just kind of in my mind. But in terms of embarrassment, I feel deeply embarrassed by everything I ever make. I mean, I just feel just generally embarrassed. That's kind of my default setting. And I find the experience of watching anything I make like profoundly embarrassing, and like deeply self-revelatory, even though like nobody would fucking know that I was revealing anything through whatever directing I ever did, but I feel it. I feel really exposed. So the embarrassment thing is a thing. I think I'm definitely a much better director. Like that is kind of like without a question. Like I think if I watched my first summer work show, which was this adaptation of Phaedra called Faye, that was like set in a trailer park. I'm sure I would just be a bit like just somewhat horrified by it.
I saw it. It was really good.
I loved East of Berlin, so I was just kind of like shocked when he said that he thought it was a bad play. But I get it. I think we have our own relationships to our work and our artistry, and I think I'm a much more sensitive individual in the room. I think my life over the past 20 years, I've gone through some hard knocks, and that has really shaped my heart and my soul. And so I think that's definitely reflected in my work. I think as a younger artist, I really loved camp. I loved outrage. I loved sort of overt theatricality. Those are not qualities that I'm drawn to personally as an artist.
Why do you feel so exposed by your work? And like, what do you think you're exposing? Like, what is it that people are seeing, and why is that? Exposing sounds like it's painful.
I do find the creative process to be super painful. I don't know if we talk about things in this way anymore, but for me, the impulse to create is somehow linked to a feeling of self-hatred and a kind of feeling of unworthiness of existence, and that the act of creation for me is a kind of declaration of existence, a kind of it's born out of a need to be seen. And so I think that's why it's embarrassing, because it's true. Like, I don't direct like autobiographical work, but yet, I do somehow feel that the plays that I direct, like 90% of them are kind of forms of self-portraiture through story, through other story. And I feel like I'm confessing rather than expressing something about my existence through the work that I'm drawn to. And so that's the feeling of exposure, but it's totally in my head. Like, it's really totally a mind thing. But I have I don't have a peaceful self-care kind of relationship to art making. I find it gut-wrenching. So that's my answer to that.
Does the meaningfulness of creating work counterpoint the pain?
Absolutely. 100%. 100%. Yeah. Yeah.
And what do you think it is that made you feel unseen?
I think a combination of factors of just sort of, growing up sort of in the environment that I grew up in, which wasn't very kind to me and very welcoming to me, and for a whole slew of reasons. I sort of grew up in this environment and yet somehow had this need inside of me to feel valid. And sort of my first experience of theater was, when I was 13 years old. I kind of enrolled into some sort of youth theater program for kind of like disadvantaged youth in Montreal. And it was all youth led, like it was like the 80s. So it was like super, pro youth, and like the city of Montreal donated a bunch of abandoned hangars in old Montreal. And so we kind of had this like kind of rusty, really kind of super dangerous hangar. And we put on a theater festival. And I kind of remember like there were adults sort of around just making sure nobody died, but it was really driven by young people. And I think for me, that was the first moment in my life where I really felt seen. And I felt seen by my peers. And it's like, that's where I got laid for the first time. It's where I started smoking and started drinking. And I made friends, actually made friends. And so, sorry, it's a very long answer, but
I love this answer.
Essentially, like my sense of identity and life experience became forged with the experience of making theater. And so for me, the theater wasn't like this. It was only later that I kind of realized that there were things like bigger theaters and professional theater. Like I had no concept of that. I thought it was just like this way that people were together.
So theater is like a crucible for both like visibility and then belonging and then identity. So all of the things.
Totally. That for me, absolutely. You said it so beautifully. Absolutely. Yeah. I do want to hear about how you fell into the theater. I know a little bit about your background, but I'd love to know how you came into the theater.
I came to theater really late, like 16, 17. Like I was not a theater kid at all. And I just really, like I suddenly had that experience that you're talking about and I think for me, to be honest, it was actually even less about making friends than it was about being able to inhabit these gorgeous texts. And they meant so much, like saying that poetry and those words meant so much to me. And it was like, I felt like at home in the words and at home in like the poetry of like,
Yeah.
Shakespeare.
And did you have a kind of writing practice as a younger person?
No. But when I went to National Theatre School, I started to write. I was in the acting program there, and I started to write while I was there, and like words poured out of me, much easier. I was a shitty actor.
I doubt that. But it sounds like you fell in love with the word. And what is language to you?
I don't know. You know what's weird is I've been rereading Samuel Beckett lately, and I've been like, yeah, like I'm like with Beckett. I'm like, yeah, like the world has just given me these words and I just use these words and they have been evacuated of all meaning sometimes and I still use them because I have no other words. Like I'm with him on that at the moment. But, when I was a child, I think I felt really comforted by them. I felt really comforted by Shakespeare and by the poetry of Shakespeare and the ability to lose myself and to go to a place that was neutral and not a place of pain.
Like, as you said, language is something that we've inherited and we just use. We just use and I lose a sense of, am I expressing my reality, or is my reality being created through the expression that I use? But there's something about
What'd you say?
it's probably both, on some level. There's probably some given, push-pull there. But the theater really allows you to use language to simply just create reality. And I found that to be so liberating as a younger person. And I still find that liberating, that we create reality through what we say. And that is scary, but also really liberating. And then the other thing about theater, which I really loved as a young person, was its obsession with truth. And yet it's totally rooted in fiction. And I just find that paradox of we talk about the truth of a moment, of a scene, of whatever, and yet we're all pretending. And that to me just felt really true to life. It really felt like we can't look directly at the sun. There's something about our condition as humans that we can only sort of look at things through a back door.
Yeah, like you want to play in the zone of meaning, but you don't want it to get too painful. And so you force it through, a kind of diffusing lens of fiction, and it allows you to arrive at it in a way that feels, can feel beautiful.
Yes.
I think.
And also maybe there is no meaning. And so to kind of just look at it in face value, there's actually nothing to see. And so we have to construct words, language, concepts, fiction, stories to create not necessarily even order from chaos, although that's probably part of it. It's just also just fucking meaning. And I felt meaning in the theater, and I still find meaning in the theater. And I do. I'm probably somewhat nihilistic in just left to my own devices. I don't see a ton of meaning.
What do you think about narrative activism? Is that something that you believe in? And is that something you believe yourself to be doing?
I feel like in sort of Western theater of the last, 150 years or 100 years, there's kind of this polarity between sort of Artaud and Brecht. And Brecht, when you say narrative activism, I kind of think of Brecht who sort of treats the human as a kind of rational creature, that can, through story and through the experience of theater, can arrive to rational, ethical choice making. And then you have Artaud, which I think, treats the human as a kind of bag of chaotic impulses and uncontrollable desires. And the theater is a space to kind of activate that. Society kind of represses that, and the theater is a space to activate it and release it and purge it. I think I'm kind of more of an Artaudian. I think that's the work that I'm drawn to, and it's the experience of theater that I love is where I lose a touch with reality. I can't even follow story anymore. I'm just kind of in a bit of a state of questioning. So in terms of narrative activism, I'm probably not a narrative activist in the work that I do. I'm not drawn to it. But how about you? I mean, your parents are such politically driven animals. You're incredibly political in your life. I'm curious to hear about your thoughts about narrative activism.
I mean, I'm making a vampire show right now.
Which I fucking love, by the way. I just have to say, this is totally off topic, but I fucking love the show that you're making.
One of the questions you sent me ahead of time as a possibility on your list was about, how I felt about art for art's sake, which made me wonder, honestly, where you fell in all of this. And it's curious and interesting to hear you express it so articulately, what actually it is. Because I think in the end, when I think about what I want from any art form, really, it's that it arrives at truth. And that's a crazy thing to say, because I think my answer would have been really different years ago. I would have given a wrong answer years ago, but I've arrived at the right answer. I really want a piece of art to show me a truth, and the truth can be primal. And a lot of the time, the best truths are primal. But like those moments where you're like, oh fuck yeah, like that's kind of what I'm looking for. I think, like I want like something that hits my solar plexus, and yet like for sure, I think I have a commitment in me to narrative activism, but I try and arrive at it through complex means, and to bury it within a story, and then then you have to ask yourself all sorts of questions like how far have I buried it, and am I fucking deluding myself into imagining this is gonna even read to audiences as what I'm actually trying to communicate. But I think I am super committed ultimately to, for instance, like one of the more meaningful plays to me to put up was a play called Secret Life of a Mother with Beatty, where I was very confessional, which felt fucking terrible because I'm relatively private. And I felt more exposed than was comfortable by so far, to the point where I felt like I was almost like hitting catatonia. Like I was like, we're not really going to like do this play. Like I was like, this is all like, this isn't actually going to happen. And yet like it still felt incredibly meaningful to like talk about a side of women's lives that is unheard of. And even when I say it like that, I feel like it's disgusting. Like I'm like, I want to vomit. I'm like, I don't want to talk about women's lives. Like it just feels terrible. And yet it was so meaningful. And so I live within that paradox.
Yes. I have a couple of things. One thing is, to harken back a little bit about what you were saying about the experience of seeing theater and like the fuck yes moment. And a friend of mine describes this, and I thought it's so right, is like when you see a good piece of art, you're like, how the fuck did you know that about me? Because I didn't even know that about me.
You think it's your idea almost. It's like that's how best art makes you go like, oh, that's an idea of mine that I've never been able to articulate before.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, this is a bit of a like practical shift, but like what are your criteria then for taking on a project as an artist?
The material that draws me, I mean, there's thematic obsessions that I have around sexuality and death. I mean, I'm sort of fascinated by the shadow, and so that is a thematic obsession of mine. There has to be an element of the impossible in the play for me to kind of really want to engage with it, and a kind of,
what does it mean?
Like how the fuck am I going to stage that? Or that is an obscene interaction. I don't understand what's happening in that dynamic, but there has to be a feeling of impossibility and kind of mystery. Like it's a bit like an erotic relationship. Like there has to be an unknown quality for it to be really erotic. And then the other thing is I think really great plays are, as they kind of function, they're engaged in the question of what is theater and why theater. Like somehow through the play's existence, it's somehow in relationship with these fundamental questions.
What is the link between sex and death?
Probably transcendence, I guess. I think it's probably transcendence and mystery. Like I feel I haven't died, so I don't know, but certainly I think my moments of kind of most sort of physical engagement, but also a kind of spiritual engagement is through sex and pleasure, and then mystery.
Oh, I honestly feel like you just explained something to me that I have long wondered about, and I never really understood.
Oh, good. But going back to you and your the impulse, where do you start? Do you start from a similar place, or is it always different?
I often don't know where my ideas for plays really come from, and I don't seem to run out, and I don't really know. I think I'm on instinct. For all that I may sound intelligent, I'm actually on instinct a lot when I'm writing, and I think one of the things that I do very much on instinct when I write is design the the design and execute at the same time. So like I kind of don't know how I design because I'm doing it through the physical process of execution. But when it comes to writing plays and like where ideas come from and how it happens, I'm like, I don't know. I just sit and type and it feels good and stories come out.
Has it always been like that from the first play, or is this just through repetition? You kind of have a kind of internal compass that's sort of guiding you, or has it always been like this?
No, and there have been plays for sure. Like when I was younger, for sure, I used to like, I don't know if anyone else would understand this word, but it used to have this feeling of grinding. Like I used to grind more. Like I'd be like, like where you can feel yourself up against something and you're using all of your muscles, force yourself past probably stupidity or like inexperience. Like you're like trying to push through something. And now I just have, at least with theater, I think just because of experience, I have like a feeling of just ease with it. And it feels really good. And actually on that note, I wanted to ask you, do you feel that thing of like, yeah, I'm now mid-career or I'm a veteran and I fucking know how to do this and I can like go into a room and I can run the room and I know lights and I know big stages and small stages and I know like, does that feel good or does that make you restless?
No, I feel like what you described in terms of like the flow of writing a play, like I relate to that. And the experience of directing when I was younger was super like angular, and like I basically pretended to be about 5 different directors that I'd kind of been directed by, because I started off as an actor as well. And I'd be like, okay, I'll be this person now, and like nothing felt authentic. It felt really, I was just a bit kind of faking it till I make it, and that was cool. Like I kind of was very conscious of doing that.
I relate to that hardcore. When I read my early works, I'm like, I know who I was influenced by.
I think that's what it is. I think you have that's how it happens. But now I think I kind of step in and I'm just sort of informed by a body of knowledge, and it's physical knowledge. It's not intellectual. Like I am super instinctive as well as a director, and I can just kind of just be an animal in the room and just trust that my instincts are going to be informed and good. And I don't have to grind. I don't have to grind anything. So it's so much more relaxing. And I'm so over the whole bullshit of like leadership, like a lot of the stuff that we kind of grew up around, like running a room and, being the leader. And I'm just, I'm a lot more relaxed about that kind of stuff. Like I have no problem picking up and making a decision. Like it's not a problem for me. But I'm also just like, whatever. That's not a tense thing. There's no tension around it.
Is there tension left around anything?
Oh yeah. I mean, I think my life is filled with tension. But the rehearsal hall is a space where I kind of can't tolerate it anymore. It's just like the rehearsal hall is sacred. It's a space for hard work and soul searching and conflict, and it's all the things that are involved in a creative process. But it's not tense, and I'm not. I want to be guided by the work. I want the poetry of a play to enter the room and guide me. I don't want to drive it. I don't want to fucking drive the goddamn rehearsal process. I want the play. I want the play and the collective spirit of artists in the room to drive the process. And that is so liberating, because I feel I'm a driver in so many other areas of my life. Yeah. I'm curious to hear you speak a little bit more about feedback, and what is feedback that's useful. There's the when. You mentioned the when it's happening, but I'm also curious about the content of the feedback. What feedback is useful and what feedback just isn't helpful for you as a writer?
I'm looking for, here's what I'm trying to communicate. Here's how I'm trying to communicate it. Am I doing it or not? Is it happening or not happening yet? In this moment, here's what I'm trying to get to, but am I getting to it or not? I'm trying here to create an ambiguity, which is to open up 2 ideas in the mind of the audience at the same time. Is it just incoherent, or is it ambiguity in the positive, where there's like 2 ideas in the mind of the audience being opened up at the same time? What for you? So I'm really interested to know, like for you as a director, who gives you feedback ever? And when, like, who are the people to whom you go for feedback, or do you like feedback, or how does that work with a director, and what does that look like for you? And do you want that, or do you feel like you don't need that? Like, where does that sit for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think the feedback ultimately comes from the audience. Like, I think that's really where the feedback happens. And my experience of directing is I sort of have to be an audience member at all times, so that I'm sort of self-generating feedback. There's it's really hard as a director to not see what you want to see, and to miss what's actually happening. So I really try to practice like kind of real presence in front of, like, okay, what are the actors actually offering, and what's working and what isn't. So I guess the answer there is somehow I have to sort of self-generate feedback. I don't ask people for feedback on my mise en scène. Like, I don't. But certainly, like with designers, we're constantly engaged in a conversation about world building, and so there's kind of built-in sharing of ideas and impressions and feedback all the time. And I really love designers that I feel are kind of like we're walking sort of arm in arm, kind of like trying to make this thing happen. And we're working together on building a world and an aesthetic.
I wish we asked creators like what they want the audience to feel at the end of the play. Like, what do you want them to feel at that point? And then do they feel it? Because then you have kind of a way of determining if you have communicated.
And that a story is actually a series of choices that lead to a feeling, which may also be attached to an idea and a thought, but it's a feeling, and I think the theater is fundamentally a physical experience. It is an embodied experience. And then there's the values that people carry around, entertainment and funny. Like, what are the values that drive notes? And I certainly feel that. I feel empathy for playwrights, because questions or notes can also just be veiled ideas and agendas around values.
I think it is so tricky to know which notes to take and which not to. And like, I often feel like I'll get notes, like I'll be like, I am making this dog. And then I'll get notes that are like, I would like you to make a chicken. And I'll be like, I'm not going to. But you can give me notes on the dog.
Ability and how, because a lot of young artists have a hard time making that distinction and have a hard time asserting, their intent. Where did that come from? Did you always have that?
Yeah, I don't know where that comes from though. Like, I definitely in the early part of my career turned down productions where I was asked to make fundamental changes to the play that would better fit the mandate of the theater. And it was hard to turn those productions down because they were the first that were ever offered to me. But I did, because I felt like in the end, it was more important that the work had integrity than that it be produced, I think. And it comes up, regularly in my career. And I always think I'm such a people pleaser, and I have a hard time saying no to people. And yet then we'll arrive at a point where if someone says, like, we want it to be this way, and that's counter to what I think the piece fundamentally is, I will say no, and I will stand in that 100%, and there will be no moving me. But I am so curious to know, like, what place do you feel conflict has within your work, like, and within the collaborations within your work? And does conflict make you feel unsafe?
I don't mind conflict. I think conflict is healthy. And I think a creative process without conflict is, I question it. Like, there's certain things I question in creative processes, and one is like, if there's no conflict, I question it. If I'm not embarrassed, I kind of question it, because am I really saying something true? Like Jean Genet once said, like, art, without a bit of criminality is just academic, and there has to be danger. There has to be a bit of the ineffable, So those are all elements that I think are critical to a creative process. And chaos, I think, there needs to be chaos in the room. It has to. You have to manage it. It has to be like when I cast, I'll often try to just inject an actor. There's just those actors who are just mavericks, and I love them. But if you have a cast of mavericks, it's a fucking nightmare. But if you have a cast of people pleasers, and conflict avoiders, it just deadens the process. So I always try to make sure there's one or two just wild cards in the room, because chaos is critical to creativity. So yeah. Okay, well, I think we've reached the end. I mean, it's so nice. It was so nice to chat with you and just to spend this time with you.
It was so nice to chat with you. It was what a ridiculous pleasure. Thank you for talking to me.
Yeah.
I know, it was so nice, Brendan.
Thank you.
So nice.